This is a story based on documented historical events, operational reports, and the recorded experiences of commanders and pilots during World War II. It is the story of how American fighter forces gradually took control of the skies over Europe, and how German Air Command came to understand that the balance of power had shifted beyond recovery. At the outset of the air war over Europe, the German Luftwaffe remained a formidable force. Its pilots were combat-hardened, its command structure centralized, and its interception doctrine refined through years of conflict. German air defenses relied on rapid detection, coordinated launches, and short, aggressive engagements designed to disrupt enemy formations before they could reach their targets. American forces entered this environment with determination, industrial strength, and a growing air arm, but without a complete solution to the challenge of sustained air presence deep over enemy territory. Early daylight bombing operations exposed a critical vulnerability. Once escort fighters reached their fuel limits and turned back, bomber formations became isolated. German after-action reports from this phase frequently describe successful interceptions carried out with timing and coordination. Yet even in these reports, a note of concern emerged. Luftwaffe intelligence officers observed the sheer scale of American production and the regularity with which new aircraft and crews appeared. This was not an enemy that could be exhausted quickly. As American commanders absorbed these early losses, a doctrinal shift began. Fighter operations were re-examined not simply as protection for bombers, but as a means of controlling airspace. Aircraft such as the P-47 Thunderbolt were increasingly employed at high altitude, using speed, firepower, and structural durability to challenge German fighters directly. German pilots initially underestimated these aircraft. However, maintenance logs and combat summaries soon recorded repeated encounters where American fighters absorbed damage that would have disabled lighter aircraft. The Thunderbolt's ability to return from missions despite significant hits became a recurring theme in German technical assessments. By late 1943, internal Luftwaffe communications began reflecting a change in operational tone. Reports from frontline airfields noted that American fighters were appearing earlier along bomber routes, flying higher, and remaining on station longer than anticipated. Interception windows narrowed, forcing German pilots into rushed climbs and unfavorable engagements. On the American side, mission briefings increasingly emphasized coordination, altitude discipline, and mutual support. Fighter groups were trained to think beyond escorting bombers. They were now tasked with denying the enemy access to key airspace altogether. This shift transformed the nature of air combat. By 1944, American fighters were no longer reacting to German attacks. They were shaping them. Patrols were extended ahead of bomber formations. German assembly points were disrupted before attacks could be organized. Luftwaffe situation reports from this period describe a persistent pressure that interfered with planning and reduced tactical flexibility. Aircraft performance now played a decisive role. Fighters such as the P-51 Mustang demonstrated an ability to operate efficiently across long distances while maintaining high-altitude effectiveness. German technical evaluations acknowledged that American fighters could remain over contested areas longer, often forcing German units to choose between engagement and fuel preservation. At the same time, logistical strain became impossible to conceal. Internal messages within the Luftwaffe increasingly focused on fuel shortages. Allocation notices restricted flying hours. Training programs were reduced. Newly assigned pilots entered combat with limited preparation, a fact noted with concern in several operational memoranda. Maintenance reports told a similar story. Aircraft that might once have been returned to service quickly now remained grounded due to shortages of parts and skilled personnel. German commanders repeatedly reported gaps between aircraft availability on paper and aircraft actually capable of flying combat missions. American forces, by contrast, operated within a system designed for sustained pressure. Losses were replaced rapidly. Tactical lessons were gathered, analyzed, and distributed across units with consistency. Adjustments in formation spacing, patrol timing, and engagement tactics appeared quickly in subsequent mission reports. German intelligence summaries struggled to account for this adaptability. Even as German units attempted tactical adjustments, altering interception altitudes or timing, American effectiveness continued to increase. Reports described a sense that American operations were improving faster than countermeasures could be implemented. As Allied ground forces advanced across Western Europe, air superiority revealed its full impact. German ground units reported difficulty moving during daylight hours without detection. Supply movements were increasingly restricted. Requests for air cover from ground commanders rose sharply, but responses were often limited by fuel shortages and aircraft availability. Orders from German Air Command encouraged pilots to disengage when altitude advantage was lost and to avoid prolonged combat. Yet follow-up reports frequently stated that American fighters controlled the engagement. Speed and altitude allowed them to initiate contact, apply pressure, and withdraw at will. By late 1944, internal correspondence within the Luftwaffe reflected a stark reassessment. The challenge was no longer tactical ingenuity, but structural imbalance. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft regardless of condition. Pilot losses could not be replaced at the required pace. Aircraft sat idle not because they were destroyed, but because they could no longer be used effectively. Meanwhile, American fighter operations continued with confidence and coordination. Aircraft like the P-47 Thunderbolt enforced control of key air corridors, protected advancing ground forces, and denied the enemy freedom of movement. The American air campaign functioned as an integrated system, linking intelligence, logistics, fighters, and bombers into a sustained effort. German headquarters reports from the final stages of the war no longer focused on regaining air superiority. Instead, they emphasized preservation of remaining resources and the limitation of losses. The language of initiative gave way to the language of endurance. The outcome in the skies was no longer in doubt. American fighters achieved dominance not through a single decisive moment, but through sustained pressure, disciplined doctrine, and overwhelming organizational capacity. What had once been contested airspace became controlled airspace. What were once temporary setbacks for German forces became permanent conditions. With control of the skies secured, Allied operations advanced with fewer losses and greater momentum. The collapse of effective German air resistance removed one of the last obstacles to victory in Western Europe. This was not a story shaped by exaggeration or myth. It was written in operational reports, logistical records, and the assessments of commanders on both sides. It was the result of adaptation, coordination, and the ability to sustain effort longer than the enemy could endure. By the end, the Luftwaffe no longer asked how to defeat American fighters. The question had become how long operations could continue under conditions that no longer favored them. And in that realization, the air war over Europe reached its decisive conclusion.